So, welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, David Greggy, here on Inside Movies Galore. This is episode 46, where we are talking about Larry Cohen's film from 1985 called The Stuff. Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit of the film's a little bit, describe the film, if you can.
The film was about this yogurt substance that people were eating, and it became very popular. Everyone loved it, but certain people were eating it, and it had an effect on people where they were like, it was turning certain people like into like almost like a zombies, yeah. And they were trying to like figure out what was causing it, and that was like the whole like plot of the movie was like trying to figure out what the heck was going on with this substance and like what was like causing this whole like uproar over this the stuff, you know.
Well, it was a satire. It was a satire on marketing and products, especially like irresponsible marketing in food, because it's the main theme of the movie was the stuff sells, but it's dangerous. It's an invasive force that takes over people's bodies. Like, I described it as the blob in reverse. Like, to eat you, you have to eat it, and then it eats you from the inside out.
That's what I thought at first. At first, I thought like this is like the first few moments I thought of the Blob right away.
Not only that, but it's also corporate espionage. In that sense, it kind of reminded me. It's not period, but it reminded me of something like The Informant with Matt Damon. You know, which deals with that exact kind of topic of corrupt business practices. And you know, I mean, if you took the science fiction element out of it, you would have a good like corporate espionage film, especially because they linked it back to the whole idea of the fact that the corporate there's a lot of corporate secrets that are illegal, particularly, and they reference this by name, but with the Coca-Cola formula, you know, that's actually kept under lock and key. It's kept in a highly secure location, so that way nobody can get at it unless they're authorized personnel, just because it's such a prized secret. And there's a lot of corporate secrets that are like that.
Katie, was this your first time seeing it, or was this
oh no,
a rewatch?
This is a rewatch. This is a favorite of mine.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's one of those that I can even show my kids because it kind of it does sort of border on like sci-fi horror and not so much scary horror where my 10-year-old wouldn't be able to enjoy it. So yeah, this is one that I like quite a bit, and I think I partially do like it because of the satirical critique on the American consumers culture. You know, I like that about Romero's Dawn of the Dead as well. That poking fun at or exploiting the idea of how kind of consumer focused America really is. I enjoy films that exploit that, and I think that's partially what I really like about this movie. And I agree too that it is kind of a neat espionage film in a way. I enjoy Michael Moriarty in this film quite a bit. His role as Mo Rutherford.
Yeah, he was awesome in this. Like,
totally.
It's kind of amazing that he's almost like a different actor in this. Like, he's charismatic, and you just like this guy.
Totally. I agree.
Whereas in some of his other roles, it's kind of not really the same. I mean, he was in Larry Cohen's entry on Masters of Horror, Pick Me Up, where he plays one of the serial killers. And from the interviews in that, I got the impression he was kind of a dick. So it was kind of like, wow, like he's making me like him again.
Alrighty. Brandon, what was your was this a rewatch or have you seen this film before?
Actually, this is my first time seeing this film.
Oh, really?
I've had it in my collection for a while, and it's been on my list for a long time. I got that one around the same time as I'd gotten Dead Alive in my collection. And then I put most of my priority on Dead Alive and left that one to the side. But I look at this one and I almost feel the same vibe as sort of a They Live. Though Dead Alive seems to take more of that graphic feel that it might be similar to in that sense. But I read up a little bit on the background of some of the people doing it, and of course the intentional take on American corporate greed. That I can't remember who it was, but they had talked about how they were upset about how much junk food had actually been approved by the FDA for consumption, and how it was ruining the health of America, and that this was part of that. And then, of course, all the Haagen-Dazs that they used, I think it was Haagen-Dazs they said was the ice cream that they used for a lot of that stuff.
I thought they used actual shaving cream in some shots.
In some shots. And then the fire extinguisher foam in some shots. It was interesting how they went about doing it.
It actually reminded me of marshmallow fluff.
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
I don't know
It's
why
like-
they didn't use marshmallow fluff.
To me,
when
it's like
filmed
they
it.
took a whole can, a whole like batch of Barbasol shaving cream, and used it in a way where they could make it seem like they had like somebody like in a suit underneath this darn stuff going like, "Ah," or something like that, that to make it look like they were having it move. What did anyone think about the scene where the stuff came out from underneath the bed, and it looked like it was being squirted at the wall, and the guy was being like
entombed in it.
brought or entombed up the
Well, yeah.
ceiling?
I thought it was pretty convincing. Like, I was wondering, like, how did they do that? Like, it looked like from the way Moriarty and whatever her name was were standing, like maybe it was being shot from above and they were like leaning over something.
I think I read somewhere that is how they did that.
That is how they did that?
I heard that they did the Nightmare on Elm Street trick where they had the rotating room.
Actually, I heard that they used some of the same sets, but I can't remember which ones. Well, one of them was the bedroom set.
That would have been the rotating room that I'm guessing.
We all heard something. We're on to something here.
You know, I thought about that too. And if that was indeed the same set, that wouldn't surprise me, because that must have been a really elaborate thing to rig up the rotating room. And what are they going to do? Just take it apart?
So, what did everyone think of the commercial and the song?
Catchy.
Love it. It's an earworm, totally.
So this would definitely be one where the music somewhat almost outweighs the film almost.
Well,
I wouldn't
because
go
it's
I wouldn't go that far. I think it's
I
part.
wouldn't
Yeah.
either.
Okay.
well, because it's about like commercialism and selling a product. Like, it has a really good. It had to have like a
catchy
really good jingle to go with it and sell the idea. Exactly.
Totally. It's a
Like, you
catchy
can't get
jingle.
enough of the stuff.
Gotta have that jingle.
Oh, God.
I thought it
What's
was
that part of
really
it?
cheesy, but it was good at the same time.
Cheesy
That
in
was,
the best way possible. 80s
That-
cheese is my favorite.
It was
So,
anchored in its time. That was the only issue with
Yeah.
it, because for the time, anybody who's grown up in that time period or watched commercials from that time period, that's just like spot on. Though I do feel like it's lost more on people who haven't
I remember that style.
I thought the name was just too cliche, though. I thought they could have had a better name, like The Stuff. I mean, that's
think that
just
was
a little
intentional.
too. too cheesy for me. I don't know.
I love that. I love that because it's catchy and it I don't know, but just people
Exactly.
it replicates the way that people talk because people say things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
that's
it was
true.
like
I was going
perfect,
to talk
honestly.
about this stuff with you, but you
So
know,
I first saw this movie with my friend Andrew, and so he had some thoughts too. He described it as delightfully campy, and sounds like we're all kind of coming to that consensus, huh?
Totally.
Yeah.
definitely had a campy vibe.
And I
Quote,
think just to add to the 80s, the people who appreciate the 80s and stuff, I would like to argue that although I did live in the 80s, I really appreciate the artistic style of things that were done in the 80s. Like the vibe that comes with the B horror movies of the 80s. Like, even if I never lived in the 80s, I could appreciate it. I like 70s, giallo films too. Like, I never lived in Italy in the 70s, so or never even lived in the 70s. So, I think you can still appreciate a genre thing, not because you lived through it, so you understand it, but that you just appreciate the art form. And I think you can also, oppositely, completely miss it too, if it's not your cup of tea.
Kind of
So-
funny you
Right.
say that because my favorite films tend to come from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and I am obviously not.
Right. Not because you lived through it at all.
well,
But
but
I
you're
think the
weird.
80s gets that rap, because, oh, well, you're an 80s kid, so of course you like it because you grew up in the 80s. And it's like, not necessarily, because in the 80s, that shit scared the crap out of me. I could not watch horror in the actual 80s. Now I revisit it, and it has a completely different meaning. And
It's like
it
nostalgic
influences
for
me.
you.
That's what I was going to
It's
say. Wouldn't that
nostalgic,
also?
but in a different way.
It's
It has
nostalgic.
like a time capsule kind of feel to it.
Well,
there's a
yeah,
nostalgia
and,
piece to
I
it.
don't think there will ever be another era exactly like it. I mean, there are films that definitely bring back the vibe, you know, but
Sure.
and I do believe that there are directors that bring back that, nostalgia, and I think that's what horror directors are trying to do these days. Bring back that feel.
And
That
I think those are always the new horror movies that I like. It ends up working out that way, that I always end up liking it, because I'm not super big on the newer ones. I almost have to be forced to watch them. So
Well,
I'm
and
down with Adam
I'm
Green
kind
and Victor
of.
Crowley.
Well, it's interesting that I'm sort of like I like retro stuff. I love it, and I love things that are old. I guess I get sort of personally, I get really annoyed with nostalgia as a go-to. Just because I find it can ride the line between. I don't know. It can be very emotionally manipulative, and it can get old really fast. And that's just kind of my personal opinion. I tend to like it when directors are able or storytellers are able to go back even further than that, and not be quite as pandering, at least. Um, I don't know. And I also am not a very nostalgic person in general, because I tend to try and make my present good. I don't really like to live in the past too much, because at least to me, the past is kind of painful. But people love it though. They love to look back. But I do think that people overdo it these days.
I'm a little bit of the. I don't want to quite say the opposite. Like, I like to take the best of like everything that I've seen. So there's a lot of value in a lot of the old things that have become classics because it's stuff that you know for sure works.
and there are classics that have
Right.
become classics that shouldn't be, too. So
Well, I guess what I mean is like if you're going to talk about classics, then you have to actually talk about classics because stuff that's like 30 years old, you might say that's a modern classic, but it's to me, classic is much older than that.
Outvoted.
There was that line from what was it, American Reunion, where they're sitting there saying, "Oh, Spice Girls, I love classic pop."
Well,
Right.
that's precisely my point. Is that people's definitions of classics tend to be pretty skewed. Like to me, classic would need to at least be like 40 years, if not. I mean, the older the better. But in
Well,
terms
we're
of that,
basically there.
in terms of
These
that,
days, anything that was done yesterday is classic.
Well, what
yeah, well,
a
again,
car is considered a classic after what? 20 years?
20 years. Yep.
So
Really?
20 years ago, yeah. I mean, like my 84 Camaro is definitely a classic at this point. I don't have it anymore, but I don't know. Maybe movies from 1984 could be classics. I
I
think
don't know.
classic is a loose term, though. Really.
It's very loose, and people love to throw it around. That's
Oh,
that's always
yeah.
well. That's always why, like, whenever anybody uses terms like classic or like campy or any term like that, I always feel like
Retro, vintage.
well, we always have to define what we're talking about because again, they're very easy to throw around. They're very relative, and it's just important to define the terms so that way people don't misuse it or because I don't know. And I'm also very particular about that
This is
because
exactly a term that you can define.
no, not objectively, and that's always why it's important to define it in the context of what you're talking about because it
Or
can
some
get
people
very,
say cult classic,
yeah, which that
Yeah,
has
well,
its own cult classics. They have their own set of definitions there, for what
This
defines a cult classic.
this sort of ties into one of the other things Andrew said. Quote, it was a film I didn't really hear much about, but really ended up liking. And I think that kind of worked, like, for me too, at least. Like, did anybody hear, like, a whole lot of buzz about it before they had seen it for the first time?
No, I didn't even hear anything about it.
I watched the when James Rolfe did Monster Madness. He did 80s-a-thon. That would have been back in like 2012, I want to say, something like that. And he did one about the stuff, and that's how I heard about it. And I thought it looked really neat. I thought it was a good idea. And I've heard about a lot of more obscure horror or like 80s horror stuff through Monster Madness, and it's just been a good resource for it.
Yeah, like when I first got into horror 5 or so years ago, oh god, 6 years now. Ugh. It was one of the tougher movies to find, but it was one of those things that the first time you saw, you're like, okay, this is pretty cool. And has anybody wondered, like, well, I'm just going to go back to my notes here. Quote, I wonder what it actually tasted like. I'm sure it was good, but had some, like, addictive chemicals in it. Or maybe was it all just mind control parasites? Like, I would like to float a discussion on that.
You never know. It could have been laced with PCP or something. It all depends because there were definitely a lot of junk food items that at the time were being marketed, and the 80s was definitely a time for the junk food era.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
The junk food era kind of
America.
offset. The junk food era offset by the exercise craze, which is kind of funny.
Yeah,
Getting back to
days.
the what does it taste like? I actually thought of the stuff. I equated it more like blood to a vampire. Like, I don't know that it necessarily was so great. They just they craved it so much it didn't really matter what it tasted like.
Like the scene where you see they've got the table set and they've got all the regular food dumped in the
Thrown
garbage
away.
and all these empty containers of the stuff laying right nearby, and then of course the family's all sitting around the TV with the stuff that they're eating. And they're like, well, there's microorganisms in this and this and this.
Somebody needs to do an artistic adaptation, crossing the stuff with They Live. Like, you could totally put those two together.
That must exist. Like,
How about you
artistic
do a
mashup.
burlesque show exactly like it?
Like the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, everybody does a stuff number. That would be really weird.
It would be really weird, but you know what? You do really weird.
I was thinking more like an art print, like an artist makes, Or I always run across the horror convention mashup things. Like I have a patch that's a Leatherface and a They Live mashup of the They Live aliens and a
I saw that
Leatherface.
patch. It's a pretty rad patch.
Yeah, it's a super awesome patch, right? So stuff like that kind of a mashup somehow.
I think
with
I
the
like.
stuff
I
in
think
there.
that I like that better. Like I was just picturing like at the burlesque show, you just like spray the audience with like white foam or whatever. Like that'd be a little.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually probably would work okay. But
or white what is it spray string
Well, if it's
Silly
if,
string.
yeah
if it's
Ramstein does that, or at least some variant of it. Look into that.
if it's white and it sprays on the audience, just remember to make it salty.
and make
Ew.
them wear raincoats.
You got to play
Yeah.
the Ramstein song too. I think it's like Book Deech or whatever the hell.
Rammstein.
Gallagher was a comedian from the 1970s, and what he would do is he would smash watermelons,
Watermelons,
and
yeah.
spray it in, and it would spray into the crowds, so the crowds would actually wear raincoats to the show.
Well, we do
Who- wait,
have
who
a
was that?
couple ladies. That was
Gallagher?
Gallagher.
Hey, Gallagher.
We do have a couple ladies who do in their tagline they do tell you to like bring a tarp because they're known to spray blood. So we do get a little messy at our shows once in a while. Blood and beer most of the time.
So,
damn.
What did
Anyway.
everyone think about the about how the inside looked of the people once the stuff left their bodies?
How it just hollowed them out. Like I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty cool. Like especially
Chocolate
like.
Chip Charlie.
Oh god, he was the best character. Andrew didn't like him because he thought he was kind of annoying. But I loved Chocolate Chip Charlie. We needed more
Yeah.
Chocolate Chip Charlie. Like I remember like his introductory joke all the time. It's like, holy shit, you're Chocolate Chip Charlie. Well, I sure as hell like the Kentucky Colonel. Oh, I loved
You know
you.
That
what
was
I was-
funny.
You know
The
what I
best
was getting
character.
from this with all the marketing or whatnot? I was getting kind of a Halloween 3 kind of vibe too, because remember they were marketing those
Yeah,
3 toys.
Yeah.
You know? There
good
was
insight.
definitely a marketing. So I think
Another one of my favorite movies. So just saying.
Well, we did that. We did that on Halloween. Watch our old
Mhm.
episodes, people. It's kind of worth it. You know, like properly.
Actually, it had sort of a trauma-esque vibe when you're looking at the effects.
It did. It was weird how they did like the graphics, and it was like they were trying to digitalize it somehow.
Well, you definitely.
Right.
I wonder if
Commercial.
Lloyd. Wonder if you watched this before doing Poultry Guys, because it's kind of a similar. Trying to achieve similar ends.
It
Yeah,
was.
I can definitely see that with the poltergeist aspect, especially since there was a scene in Poltergeist where
No,
where the
Poltergeist.
was up against the wall, and I think
no,
you go towards
Poultrygeist.
Poultry Guys, Night of the Chicken Dead.
Oh, you're
Where
talking
you
about
had
that.
those.
Yeah. I'm sure
Oh,
that
you're talking about that. That's a good
Lloyd
endorsement.
probably watched this before doing
Yeah.
Poultry Guys because they're trying to achieve similar ends. You know, as far as like the dangers of junk food, that kind of stuff.
But honestly,
yeah. Go ahead.
I thought they could have done better with the graphics, because if you look at Reanimator came out in 1985, and their graphics were way better than this movie. If you want to do comparisons,
What do you mean,
Well,
their
this-
graphics?
Are you talking about like their practical effects, like their like body
yeah,
stuff?
yeah, like
or,
just their
the CG
graphics
effects?
and like just some of their stuff. Like I don't
You
know,
didn't
there
like
was a
the
couple
green
scenes where
screen
I thought they
Kid
yeah.
inside of the tanker truck.
Oh
The green
yeah,
screen effect.
a lot
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
work wasn't that great. Like I agree with you on there. Like the illusion didn't quite play. Like it was very clear there were some moments where it's like, okay, that's definitely a miniature.
The thing about practical effects and whatnot is you got to make it believable enough for the audience at the time. And I believe that the audience of the 80s was definitely high, definitely on drugs.
think about it.
You
Though.
know,
Like,
we weren't on
how
drugs.
much exposure does the regular moviegoer have to, a body being ripped apart? Like, I know that, until I watched modern, horror stuff like that has really good special effects. I never really, I wouldn't know what a skull ripping apart looks like. So I gotta sort of take their word for it. And I'm
The
thinking people in the 80s were the same way.
the moviegoers of the 80s were there to take their girlfriends to scare the crap out of them so that they would get them into each other's arms and and have a nostalgic moment with your significant other,
And how did that hole get in the popcorn bowl?
Gross.
I can't understand, but in any case, but
Plausible deniability.
there
job.
was definitely a lot, to consider at the time. I mean,
Did anyone notice too how the guns were different in different scenes? They made
How
a
their guns
mistake
were,
where they
like-
switched. Yeah.
Their guns did seem, I want to say, older. Like, they didn't quite look like anything. Something about them felt off. I couldn't put my finger on what. Like, a lot of them looked really old.
Well, it was like in one scene they were using M16s, and in another scene they were using guns that were just different guns that they didn't match up.
I noticed that too, yeah.
I think I noticed that as well, and that's often, different props, different times.
Oh yeah. Anybody want to comment on the Colonel or whatever the hell his thing was?
Oh God, the Colonel.
Yeah.
He was a little off kilter. It's like he had kind of like a.
I called him Alex Jones in my notes.
It's like he kind of had a Gulf War syndrome thing going on.
He was very Alex Jones-esque, and yet I always find that amusing that you have certain movies like this that the kook balls save the day, and of course
Which
it's
is kind of sad.
Well, it's Paul Sorvino who rocks. But
That
yeah,
was Paul Sorvino?
Yeah.
Like when he
Cool.
didn't trust Chocolate Charlie to go on the radio.
Oh man, that was pretty
Intense.
wow. Or say one word in code. What the fuck is he talking about?
If you say
yeah.
one thing that even remotely sounds like a communist, or if you say anything in code, I will be watching.
And I like how Michael Moriarty's character just like manipulates him into taking out the stuff. It's like, you were right. He like says everything he needs to get this guy on board.
When you gotta love that.
Communists are putting drugs in the food. I knew it.
When you gotta love at the very end that the stuff's still being sold on the streets like a street drug.
I appreciated that too. That was good.
Which made it left open to a possible sequel, which probably never happened because of how much the drug administration appreciated the film, or at least the food administration as well. It was kind of like a kick in the nose.
Well, that
at
and the fact that it didn't do well at the box office, that's like the big.
Well, of course not, because all the food administrations were behind the box office at the time. So,
well, and you can kind of look at that as a nod to Street Trash. I mean, there you have a similar setup in the plot where people are getting their hands on the Tenemor Viper, and it's melting them, and it's making its way around kind of in a similar way, again, like a consumable. This is a different setup, but that's another kind of related. I even saw they had it as a related film on IMDb. So,
Oh, that's cool.
Another one of my favorite movies. Just always putting that out there.
It's such a weird movie. Like, it's a good movie, but it's a weird movie.
It is weird. Totally.
Hey, did anybody else think that ending was awesome, where they make the corporate guys like eat a lot of the stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Classic poetic justice there.
And the whole entry,
Poetic
the whole
justice
beginning of that
never
scene
really
too.
happened.
It's like they haven't learned anything. It's like we've got a new product. It's called the Taste, and like
Yeah,
Stuff
that
Guy
was
has
funny.
teamed up with Ice Cream Guy, and it's like, oh, it's 88% dairy and only 12% the stuff. It'll be fine. It's like, have you tested it? Oh yeah, sure. All right, you eat some of it. Oh no. Paul's gun. Kid comes in with a box full of actual stuff. It's like, you wouldn't use that in front of, like, I like this little speech he gave.
So
you wouldn't
would you
use that with
say
the boy here.
So
It's
would
like, well, his family's been killed. He's
Well-
lost everything.
Well,
He's been through a lot.
I like that it does sort of take a shot at the fact that with the FDA and with other, especially with the FDA, I know that, for example, like there are harsher restrictions on tap water than there are on bottled water, for example. And like, so for certain regulatory agencies, the standards of quality can vary wildly across the different agencies. And, so it's sort of taking a shot at that, plus the fact that, if you have certain companies that are big enough, then theoretically they could buy off certain officials or at least get special treatment as far as like getting it expedited through the regulatory process and that kind of stuff, which does happen to various extents. And so it's sort of taking a shot at the fact that, especially nowadays with, big drug companies being able to, achieve various levels of, stringency regarding what goes into everything, or certain brands being favored over others and that kind of stuff. It's sort of.
So do you believe that this might have possibly been against the drug administration as well, besides the food administration?
Well, I mean, it is the FDA. I mean, it's all connected.
It's all of
It's
the
called the
above.
Food and Drug Administration.
I know.
Well, that, and it's also just, it's the same. The principle is the same, that regardless of the agency, that when you have different standards and levels of quality control that get applied, it also varies between administrations, of course, because certain administrations put more regulatory measures in place than others do, and
I.e., more thought and caring.
well, it's just like it depends on how much of that is in there, and then that will push things through that don't necessarily need to go through or whatever. So
Awesome. Brandon, did you have anything related to say about the film? Did you do you feel like it holds up over time, even though you've just only seen it recently?
Well, I mean, again, it's all about preference, as has been stated prior to this. I mean, there are a lot of people who like the 80s horror genre, and this fits right in. I think the message is far-reaching, but the tone is pure 80s, and that's great, and for some and not for others, but that's just how it is with most art. But as far as the message itself, I think the message resonates pretty well at any century. Shoot, the message would have resonated 30 years earlier.
the messages of Shakespeare plays resonate with us, 500 years later, and so yeah, it depends on how universal the message is, if in order for it to register, 30 years later, let alone 500 years later.
And Shakespeare is a good example because there are people who can eat Shakespeare up without any problem. They could read Shakespeare direct and love every minute of it. And then there are a lot of people who the language and time just makes it hard for them, or they just have left it up because of that. It's like I say, it's about interest and about that. Though I think if you break it down for those who don't care to deal with that area, I think that they end up coming back to it and getting more enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, I've read almost every Shakespeare play. There's a couple I need to finish, but
I've seen the full adaptation of Romeo and Juliet down at the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, and man, was he a pervert.
Well,
Well, no, I mean, at the time, 13, 14-year-olds getting married was the norm. So,
Well, if it's really done in the full adaptation, free line, Mercutio is quite a pervert.
Oh, I mean, it's just
Well,
like one of my.
by today's standards, yes.
And again, it's about that taste. Like one of my favorite books, fantasy books, is the Silmarillion. But I can tell you that there are not many people who will tell you that it's their favorite fantasy book, and I wouldn't begrudge them for saying it. So
Alrighty. Did anyone else have anything else to add?
what do you guys think about the music? Like at the end, the music over the end credits was really almost like an Indiana Jones movie. Like it didn't quite seem to fit the tone. You know what I mean? I had it down as adventure music.
You know what's funny? I just the second thought of this, but have any of you seen Thank You for Smoking?
Oh, great!
I have
movie.
not.
I love that movie, but it's basically about a lobbyist who lobbies for the tobacco industry on Capitol Hill, and he's played by Aaron Eckhart, and he's just a really smooth customer. And I almost wonder if you made that today, you would almost certainly have to do something with lobbyists these days, just because the power of lobbyists on Capitol Hill is so great, as far as providing real dollars to back congressional campaigns and that kind of stuff, and to actually really get things going in government. Certainly have to have a character like that if you were to update this story. And interestingly enough, they didn't go that route. They went with corporate espionage, which is a perfectly good route to take it. I just, particularly given the way the world is these days, you would almost certainly have to do that angle in order to illustrate how such a thing would happen these days.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
was
was curious what other people thought on these two things, and they just stuck out to me. There are only two parts about this movie that annoyed me.
Okay.
The first was just the very beginning, where the guy just reaches down at this bubbling pool, picks.
And the first thing he does is taste it. Like
The first thing he does is taste the white ooze coming out of the ground. Yeah.
Well,
that bothered the shit out of Andrew too the first time we saw it. He was like, "What the hell is he doing?" And I was
being
like,
a medical professional, I can see that. I mean, how the fuck do you do you know what the hell he touched before that? You know.
I mean, it was bubbling. I mean, it could have been really, really hot, which might have. But then there's also the other part that bothered me, and I kept getting aggravated with the kid because the kid seemed fairly intelligent through most of this, except for the fact that he climbed into a tanker truck. That was the place he decided to choose to hide, and then got surprised when it was closed in behind him, and that it got filled with stuff. I don't know. That maybe it's just like normal for people to do that, but that annoyed me.
Well, here's something else. The kid did annoy me too, in the sense that like he's such a standard kid character, and that's literally it. We know nothing else about him. He goes nuts in the supermarket. The newspaper says he gets arrested. He could totally be tried as a minor for property destruction, and yet nothing is made about that. Again, it just is grounded for life. Yeah, right. He could totally be tried as a juvenile.
There's a lot they could have done with
Very
it.
possible that
that really bothered me. Plus the fact that he's so stupid to get in the tanker truck.
I mean, in this day and age, do you think that knocking all that stuff to the ground, do you think you would just get a grounding?
I really don't think so. I think that you would.
Cops would probably fill you with bullets. Yeah.
Well, you'd either get shot if if you're a minority, you'd get shot easily. But if for sure you would get tried as a juvenile. I mean, and I highly doubt that those parents had enough money to pay for all that stuff.
Do you
They
think
seem pretty middle class.
Do you think at the time that this film happened, do you think that there was a mindset where, oh, the kid will just grow up? It was just just a phase kind of thing.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't alive at the time, so I can't accurately say. But I it seems to me like given the because not only did he destroy what I assume is hundreds of dollars of the stuff, because I don't know how much they were pricing it for, but given how much of it he destroyed, I'm assuming it's in the hundreds of dollars, plus the panes of glass, plus the personal assault charges they could bring up. I mean, he's got a record already, and that's just breezed, through. They don't even touch that.
What's
And
funny is
and that's not like a little plot hole. That's like pretty
A
significant.
big plot hole.
Well, that's
I
like
don't think Larry Cohen thought about that too much.
well, that's a pretty significant event in the film, and then
Mhm.
it's just glanced over. So, if it was just a little tiny detail, I would be more willing to let it go. But it's not. It's kind of like a defining character moment.
yeah. So, do you think that was? So you think that was odd that nothing else was done, like in the sense of what the law might have had to do with it?
Yeah, there was very few. There were very few repercussions for what certainly would have had a lot of serious repercussions, and that did kind of. I hate it when people use the phrase "it took me out of the movie," but like that's one time where I could actually say that just because the realism factor was pretty blatantly ignored there.
Well, yeah. I guess in the '80s, you could definitely go and trash a mall or trash a supermarket or whatnot.
Yeah, the Blues Brothers did it. Of course, they did.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say that.
Milwaukee too. So we'll have to do that on one of these episodes too.
Blues Brothers is my favorite movie of all time, so I approve.
So, alrighty. So, did anyone else have anything else to add? No.
I think we have actually had enough of the stuff.
Cool. Anyways, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I have been your host, David Streggy. Why don't we start with Kate? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from? We'll wrap this up here.
Oh, sure. Actually, can somebody else go because my battery on my mic is dying and I have to switch off. I'll go.
Sure.
I'll go next. Sorry.
Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
I'm from Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I'm a music promoter in the Milwaukee area, and I'm also a dead girl at Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics.
Awesome. Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker from Charlotte, North Carolina, and can't divulge too much, but let's just say 2018 is kind of my year for getting content made and out. Just finished shooting the behind the scenes documentary, or seeing a rough cut soon of the behind the scenes of a film I did. Another film is almost finished. Shooting a web series, shooting a fan film, trying to get the machinations going for a couple other projects, and just going to be a lot coming out this year. And unfortunately, it's a lot of stuff I can't fully speak to yet, but it'll happen soon.
Cool.
Sweet.
Definitely looking forward to all that. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
Yes, my name is Brandon. I run a YouTube page called Septonsen versus the World. We are continuing to work on our slow ascent, and we continue to try and produce content that is relative to a collection of physical media, games, music, books, but mostly movies, and continue to work on reviews. We are hoping to put out some more awards-related content in the next few weeks as Oscar season and Razzie season continues to move forward. So this is a big active time for us. And actually, next week is going to be a special week because we're going to do a tribute to a small studio called X Strike Studios that produced video game related movies on the small screen or small budget, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
Cool. And Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
Oh, hey, well, I live in Milwaukee. I go to UW, and I collect movies. I collect movies and basically anything else related to horror. I have an Instagram where I attempt to show it off. DHR Hunter, so it's supposed to be like Dustin Horror Hunter. I need to think of something better. So follow that and incentivize me to post more stuff because, good Lord, there's a lot of it. I have a problem.
Okay, I'm ready now. I can go.
Alrighty.
I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body-positive horror artist and alternative model. And you can find me on Instagram at Third Eye Open, 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can find them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I am also a dead girl for Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics. And you can find that on vimeo.com/DDCC. And I'm a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. And you can find us at facebook.com/Grindhouse Tees.
Awesome. My name is David Streggy. I am your host for the evening. I also run Movies Galore of Milwaukee, which is a blog as well as a group. And definitely check out probably posting on the page this coming
we have an interview tomorrow with somebody.
Possibly
great.
Saturday. We are having a interview with director Bill Rebane, who is director of Rana, Curse of the Lake, and the Alpha Incident, and the capture
Giant
of
Spider Invasion,
and the Giant Spider Invasion. So definitely take a look out.
Was filmed, I guess, in Wisconsin.
Yes,
or at least takes place in Wisconsin. So that's going to be kind of exciting.
Definitely.
I have like a 12-page academic paper somebody wrote about that movie, so I'm looking forward to. See, with a lot of this film analysis stuff, it feels like whoever is writing this as an academic paper projects an awful lot into what they think the filmmaker's motives were. And I've always wanted to ask one of those directors, it's like, hey, did you really mean any of this stuff, or are they just nuts? So we'll find out.
Most definitely. In any case, stay tuned, as that will definitely appear on the page, and also take a look and keep a lookout for Wrestle Massacre, which I have currently somewhat produced. I am your host for the evening. Everyone say good evening or goodbye, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Like, share, and subscribe. Good night.
Awesome.